We are in this process of where we're going to be paying off over $1 million debt as a church, so the way we can be financially free, so the way we can ultimately be a church that our community cannot live without. If you're new to checking us out, this is the third week of this series, so you may want to go and check out the first 2 weeks to get caught up. If today feels like you're joining a conversation already in progress a little bit. So that's where we're headed today. Also, one of the really fun things happened this past week is we started our groups for our fall session. Let me see just a show of hands real quick. How many of you already met with your group this week? Awesome. I know some groups are getting going this week. If you haven't, it's not too late. We'll be in the next steps room after service. You can still get in a group and find your people. But because what I love about groups is that it creates an opportunity for people to have questions answered, and not in like a Sunday morning, Sunday school fashion. You know what I'm talking about? Like sometimes when people ask questions in church, there's always like a really easy answer. Like the answer is always Jesus, right? It's just like real simple, easy. But truth be told, like you know and I know that the questions that we have, for the most part, normally are not as simple as that. There's normally like some nuance, there's some like discussion that needs to happen, there's more information. Like in one of my groups this past week, we talked about dinosaurs. Like, and how do dinosaurs fit into, all of that Christians believe in things. I'm sorry, that's not just a 10-second answer, right? We got to consider a lot of things. And there's a lot of things like that in the church and in Christianity and in the Bible. Like, it's messy a little bit. There's bigger things to think about, and there's always different perspectives that are needed. And so that's where we're going to be at today, because I'm going to ask a question that maybe you're asking. If you were here last week, hopefully you are asking this question. And for the longest time in my life, I thought that there was like one really simple answer. And then I became a pastor, and I did life with people and realized that it's not as simple as what I thought it was. Last week, we talked about the fact that you were made in the image of a generous God, so therefore you are already generous. You're already generous. God already made you that way. Some of us, we're not living it out, but you are already generous. And so the next logical question then, if I'm made to be generous, like what does that really look like, is this: how much should I give? How many of you, like, after last week, you were like, okay, I'm supposed to be generous, but now I've got the next question. How much am I supposed to give? And I always thought for most of my life that there was a really simple answer to this. I always thought that. My guess is if you were raised in church or you've been around church for a while, you already have that answer in your head. You're going, oh, I know the answer to this. I know the answer to this. I've known it for a long time. But what if there's more to the conversation that we've been missing? What if it's not as easy? Because you know what I have found out as a pastor is that when someone comes here to Southbridge Church and accepts Jesus as their Lord and Savior, they don't magically leave this building and all of their financial troubles have then been taken care of with just one prayer. Like, oh, your sins have been taken care of, but you still got bills. Right? You still got a house payment. You still got a couple cars. You might have a boat. You might have a vacation house. You may have student loan debt, whatever it might be. Like, you got saved, but you still got some financial struggles. And like, when you come to church, they'll be like, oh, yeah, you get saved, and then as a Christian, you're supposed to do this. And it's like, but you're not taking into account everything I did beforehand. We got some stuff that might need to be cleaned up. So the answer to how much should I give really isn't as easy as you might think it is. So what does the Bible actually say about what we should give as Christians? Now listen, if you're not a Christian, or if Southbridge Church is not your home church, like this is not the place where you are planted and rooted and growing, I'm not talking to you. But if this is your spot, then this is for you. Okay, if this is the place where you and your family are invested, this is for you. What should Christians give? Now, my guess is, those of you, I said, there's some of you think that you already know the answer because you're thinking, oh, I heard this before. They say it all the time in churches. I know what the answer is. The answer to how much a Christian should give is 10%. All right, let's do it. Hands up. How many of you thought that was the correct answer? All right, yeah, come on, my hands up. That's what I thought. That's what I've been told most of my life. 10%, 10%, 10%. It's like, all right. Well, the other half of you might go, well, where'd they get that from? Where did 10% come from? What are you talking about, 10%? Or if you've been around church a long time, you've heard that word tithe. Well, where did that come from? Well, here's where it came from. Leviticus chapter 27, verse 30 says this. 1/10, that's, if you want to know a quick, simple definition of the word tithe, 1/10. It means a tenth. 1/10 of the produce of the land, whether grain from the fields or fruit from the trees, belongs to the Lord and must be set apart as holy to him. 1/10. So like if we were like just doing like the simple church answers, you know what I would say to someone that says, how much should you give? I say, oh, well, the Bible says you should give 10% of your income, 10%, the first fruit, whatever comes in, that should be the first 10% that goes out. And then now if you're really into the Bible though, some of you would look and go, well, wait a second. Leviticus, if I'm not mistaken, is part of the Old Testament law. And aren't Christians free from the law? So is there still a tithe demanded upon the people of God? It's a logical question to have. Because this is an interesting debate that happens in the church. So again, this is why I like small groups, because you can have questions and dialogue. You're going to find some people in churches that say, no, the Bible's clear, 10%. You're going to find other people that go, no. The tithe, that's for the Jews. That's not for us. We're not under the law. We don't have to do that anymore. Okay, let's settle this thing. Let's get to the bottom of it. Because at the end of the day, you are generous because you were made in the image of a generous God. And so we need the answer. How much do we give? Now I'm going to come at this from maybe a weird angle. But just for a couple of minutes, I'm going to show you some scriptures that have absolutely nothing to do with giving. And then we're going to use them to help us understand the question better. Right, so in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus is preaching this sermon called the Sermon on the Mount. He's doing something remarkable in this sermon. He is talking to, because he had a predominantly Jewish crowd, he's telling the Jews, hey, you've heard it was said, like either the scriptures say it or the rabbis have interpreted it to mean this. You have heard that it was said. And then he would say something. And then he would say, but I say unto you, and it was like he was on the spot rewriting or superseding the law. It was very offensive to the Jewish people. Like, for instance, in Matthew 5:21, he says this, you've heard that our ancestors were told, you must not murder. If you commit murder, you are subject to judgment. But I say unto you, so the law says don't murder, but Jesus says that if you are even angry with someone, you're subject to judgment. If you call someone an idiot, hello. You're in danger of being brought before the court. Some of us, we got a court date. And if you curse someone, you're in danger of the fires of hell. Did you see what he did? He said, here's the law, don't murder. But I say that if the law is really accomplishing its purpose in you, you'll understand that it's more about your heart than just checking the box of making it through the day without killing someone. Because, truth be told, making it through the day without killing someone really isn't that hard. That's just my opinion, right? Now, maybe some days, I get it. Later on in that sermon, he says this, Matthew 5:27. You've heard the commandment that says you must not commit adultery, but I say, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. He goes, look. The law says just don't sleep with people you're not married with. And Jesus goes, yeah, but see, honestly, come on, let's be honest. That's a really low bar that you just make it through your day and like, well, I didn't sleep with anyone I'm not married to. Because, see, Jesus was after more. He goes, listen, it's not just that you could check the box that you didn't commit adultery today. Did you even look at someone in a way that you shouldn't have? Because I'm after your heart. I'm not after you checking a box. So he takes the law, and then he draws us beyond it. Matthew 5:32 says this, or 5:31. He said, you've heard the law, a man can divorce his wife by merely giving her a written notice of divorce. In verse 32, he says, but I say that
a man who divorces his wife unless she's been unfaithful causes her to commit adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman also commits adultery. See, what they were doing in the Jewish communities is you could get divorced for just about any reason. Actually, there were some rabbis in the first century that if your wife overcooked your stew, you could divorce her for it. And Jesus goes, no, wait. I know what the law says. I know what you all have permitted, but let me take you beyond it. Verse 38 says, you have heard that it was said, the punishment must match the injury, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them also the other cheek. It's the law, but then it's let's get to the root of the issue. Or the next one says, you've heard the law says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Now, thankfully, the law doesn't actually say to hate your enemies. This was just an interpretation that some of the rabbis had been teaching. But you get the sense that Jesus goes, listen, here's the law. But what I'm trying to do is to capture your heart that draws you beyond the law. Because the law was meant to do this in you, but it was powerless to do what the Spirit can actually do in you. So here might be your question as you're sitting here. You're going, I thought we were going to answer the question, how much am I supposed to give? And all he's told me is to not murder, not have adultery, forgive my enemies. What does any of this have to do? Well, here's the pattern that I see. That when it comes to the question, the law was that the Jews were to give 10%. So here's my question. Based on the fact that Jesus always takes the law and calls us something to go even deeper, is 10% the starting point or the ending point? Is it the starting point or the ending point? See, and this is one of the reasons why I'm such not a fan of percentage giving. Because it teaches people that there's a place in your life that eventually when you get this generous, you can just stop. Well, that's not following. That's stagnation. That's not following. That's not actually trusting the Lord. That's just checking a box. Because here's what I've come to know over the last decade of ministry. For some, 10% is a drop in the bucket. You don't miss it at all, so therefore it's not accomplishing its purpose in your heart. And for some, 10% is nothing close to what you could possibly afford. But you're giving all that you can, and it's working. So there's not an easy answer to this. And I know, like all the elders, oh, please don't say that. Some of you, you've been giving 10% for a long time. You're like, why did someone not say something about this? He always took it beyond. Because he's always been most interested in your heart. Not just checking a box. Not, oh, here's the nice, neat Sunday school answer. No. He's most interested in capturing your heart. Let me show you what it looks like. Luke chapter 21. Luke chapter 21. This is what it looks like. I promise we're going to answer your question somewhat in regards to how much to give. But let me just share the story with you. Luke chapter 21, verse 1. While Jesus was in the temple, he watched the rich people dropping their gifts in the collection box. And then a poor widow came by and dropped in 2 small coins. This is taking place on the last week of Jesus' earthly life. This is the week that later on in this week he'll be arrested, he will be crucified, and ultimately he will rise again. So it's in the last week of his life, and they happen to be in the temple. They happen to be in an area called the Court of Women, which was as far as women could go in the temple, which is farther than the Gentiles were allowed to go. So it was in there, and it was in this area that there were 7 trumpet-shaped chests that were for the temple offering. It was about half a shekel for, it was called the temple tax. It was half a shekel. It was about it was for everyone 20 years old and above that was a male. They had to pay that when they went in. That was for the upkeep of the temple. And in that same area, there were 6 trumpet-shaped chest that were for free will offerings. See, the Jews knew there was an obligation to take care of where they worship, and there was an obligation to go above and beyond that in regards to free will offerings. So they had both of these things going on. Now, here's what I find so interesting about this story. We're going to talk about this. If you're in groups, this is one of the questions, like, how creeped out would you be? Did you see what it said? That Jesus was just hanging out in the temple, watching people give their offerings. Like, do you think that probably would affect some people? Like, what would have happened earlier in this service if I just followed the ushers down the aisle? Or better yet, what if you realized that Jesus was following the ushers down the aisle? Like that's a little off-putting to me, right? Because I think there's some sense in which we get this spiritual amnesia where we forget that which we try to do privately is still not very private because there's always someone that knows. Right? So giving becomes this thing that I don't share how much I get. This is just me. And it's yeah, but listen, he does know. You can't play him for a fool. Now, listen, for me it's a little unsettling, but I don't think that this is meant to actually induce fear, because we talked about this last night. If you give out of fear or coercion or anything like that, you're going to miss the blessing of giving. I wonder if this just doesn't show you how much Jesus cares about giving, so that way you'll just include him in the process. So it nothing has to be behind closed doors. You just go, look, you already know, so why don't we work on this together, Jesus? Why don't you tell me the steps I need to take to get where you ultimately want me to be in regards to my generosity? What if you just included him in it? That I think is a recipe for success. So it shouldn't induce fear, but rather it should call you to trust him in the process of figuring it out. Now, you may be wondering, because we did hit on this last week, why does Jesus care? Why does he care what I give? You said last week that Jesus is going to build his church and the gates of hell will not prevail, and that's whether I give or not. Well, then why does he care? Again, because it's about you. It's about what he's trying to do in you. He could do this whole thing on his own. But he so badly wants you to reap the benefit and the blessing of partnership with him that he invites you into it. That's why. Because he knows, Jesus knows. This is the reason why 1/3 of every parable that Jesus told was about money. That's why people get squirmy in church when they start talking about money, but you don't realize how much of the Bible is about money, because God knew that it was going to be hard for all of us. Because he knew that it's going to ultimately show what matters the most to you. There's no denying that. That if your calendar and your checkbook, I know we don't have checkbooks anymore, but your online banking app shows what's most important in your life. There is no denying, there's not a case to be made at all. Your calendar, where you spend your time, and your online banking app, where you spend your money, will tell you what matters the most to you. Now, you may go, oh, wait a second, but that's not really how I feel. Well, then you have some mixed up priorities that you got to get squared away. But those two things always will tell on you. They will always tell on me. I think this is why I love the Message version of Matthew chapter 6. It's later on in that sermon that I was talking about earlier. This is what he says. This is in the Message version. This is a paraphrase. This is a perfectly fine version of the Bible if you want to read it. I just wouldn't study it. But I love how the author puts this together. He says, don't hoard treasure down here where it gets eaten by moths and corroded by rust, or worse, stolen by burglars. Stockpile treasure in heaven where it's safe from moth and rust and burglars. It's obvious, isn't it, that the place where your treasure is the place you will most want to be and end up being there. You want to know why the average church attender only attends church 1.8 times a month? This is my guess. You see if there's a correlation or not. I'll leave it up to you. Only 2% of any church actually tithes, actually gives generously. Only 2%. The place where your heart is the place where you'll end up being. The church isn't giving, so therefore the church attendance is just not there because it's not a place where we're invested. It's not a place where we're staking claim. We've been checking boxes, but we're not being transformed. There's no doubt a correlation between drastic decline in church attendance and the church not giving. And I'm not talking about just Southridge. I'm saying the global church. The study showed 2%. Give at least 10% of their income to the church. 2%. I told you last week that we were probably performing about half of what we could. I mean, do we understand that when we all decide to come together, what an impact we could actually have? It would be it's incredible. Because you know this, we invest in what matters to us. We invest in what matters to us. 100%. And Jesus in that passage in Matthew 6, he goes, listen, if all the stuff that you spend your time and money on is temporary, it's going to be passing away, you're investing in the temporary and not in what's eternal, not in what will last. That's a bad investment, right? If you knew that your investment was going to go bust, and that's true of all temporary things, it's a bad investment. There's a better investment. Giving helps us to prioritize what matters the most in our life, and it also breaks the hold that greed has on all of us. You want to break greed's back in your life? Become generous. Become a major giver. It will break greed's back in your life. It will render it completely ineffective and powerless in your life. And it happens through giving. So Jesus here, he's in the temple. He's creeping people out. He's watching them give. And he sees two things. He sees the rich going in and dropping large amounts of money, which this is what the rich, pious, religious folks like to do. He's like, you remember when offering, if you were around church, remember offering buckets that used to be metal normally? You could like rattle the change around in there just to let everybody know, like, oh, look at him, he's dropping. All right, you're watching that? That's what the rich folk in the temple were doing. They were making a big scene about how much money they were giving. And Jesus is really not that impressed with it. And then there's a widow that comes up. She drops in 2 copper coins. They were called leptas. They were the smallest coin in circulation. They equaled 1/64 of a day's wages. It's like in our it would have been less than a penny in our currency. Less than a penny. So the rich giving all this money, Jesus unimpressed. The poor, she gives less than a penny. I mean, it wouldn't buy not a single kid goldfish back there. And yet, look what Jesus says. He says, I tell you the truth, this poor widow has given more than all the rest of them. For they have given a tiny part of their surplus, but she, poor as she is, has given everything she has. This is a biblical principle that the first time I saw it really kind of rocked me. And this is why I'm not a percentage type teacher when it comes to giving. It's because when it comes to giving, it is not the portion that you give that matters the most, but the proportion of what is left that matters the most. See, the rich were going in and they were giving their offerings, and yet it didn't really bother them because they had so much. But the poor lady's offering of less than a penny, Jesus says, is more than everything they gave. Why? Because she gave not out of her abundance, but out of her poverty. See, if you listen to the Extra Point podcast, if not, I wish that you would. But we talked a little bit about this last week. This is why I think percentage giving is kind of unhelpful. I know you're out there, folks. Some of you make $300,000 a year. You give, let's say, $30,000 of that away, 10%. You're living on $270,000. And you're like, man, that was a sacrifice. I'm sorry for laughing. When you see it, you go, that's freaking ridiculous. Because the person that makes $50,000 a year, if they give $5,000, they're living on $45,000. That's an actual sacrifice. This is why, you can't just have a nice, neat answer of, just do 10%. Because look, for some of you, it should be more. And some of you, it might be less. This isn't a rule for you to try to take advantage of. It's wherever you are at right now, remembering the process of growing into your generosity is a process. So where you're at today is not where you should be at in a year. It's not where you should be at in 5 years. And it's definitely not where you should be 10 years down the road. You should continue to grow in your holiness and in your generosity. This is the problem with tithing theology, is it just teaches you, just get to that point and just check that box. But what if the Lord continues to bless you? Are you not also to continue to be generous to the very God that continues to bless you? The tithe is not like a recliner that once you get in it, you just prop your feet up. For some, it's a good starting point. For some, it's a good place to strive for, but it's never an ending point. Never an ending point. Listen, in this story, the widow's offering does not represent the least that you can give. Because I know, y'all got to know, Christians always looking for a loophole. That lady gave less than a penny. God liked that. Maybe I'll try that out. It doesn't represent the least that you can give. It actually represents the most that you can give. It was everything she had. It was, I don't stake a claim to any of my stuff. I'm going to fully trust God to take care of my needs. Fully trust God. So, where does this leave us? This is our question. How much am I supposed to give? Because, if you've been tracking with this sermon, you're going, wait a second. He keeps going like the law says 10%, Jesus takes us past the law, but this lady only gave a penny, and somehow that was, is your head just spinning going, just give me the answer? We'll take you back where we were last week, 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 7. You must each decide in your heart how much to give. And don't give reluctantly or in response to pressure, for God loves a person who gives cheerfully. Here's the answer, and I told you it was messy. When it comes to how much you should give, I don't know. Because I don't know your situation. You know, there was times Megan and I were trying to be generous that we were buying gas for people that were in need on a credit card that we couldn't afford. You know how stupid that is? God wasn't asking me to go further in debt to help somebody else. That's ignorant. God would have been totally okay with going, hey, you can tell that person no, you don't actually have it. In fact, you might see if they got a little extra for you. Right? God is not asking you to do something stupid in your finances. He's just asking you to trust Him. And if you trust Him, He will lead you to the place that will challenge you. Not leave you where you're at, but challenge you. Allow you to build trust in Him. But He's also not going to let you fall flat on your face. But finding that place is messy because I can't just give you a number. You have to wrestle it out. It's like we talked about earlier. Some of you got saved and you went home and you still have a stack of bills and you're like, but I want to help the church out. It's like, yeah, but you got to get that stuff taken care of. Before you can get here, you got to take care of this. Like some of us, we got past that got to get taken care of before we can be super generous. So He's going to challenge you. Here's some things. Let me give you a couple next steps. Then I want to introduce to you our pledge card for the Future Initiative. First, if you have not taken Financial Peace University, you're one of those people, you want to be generous, but you are just bound up in all kinds of debt and all kinds of stuff, you got to take Financial Peace University. You have to take it. Go to the Next Steps room, talk to Pastor Cheryl, talk to somebody about how you can get in on that class this session or next session. You got to get in Financial Peace University. It is here to help people get free. That's number one. Number two, exactly what the verse said. You need to pray. You need to wrestle. You need to ask God, how much is it that you are calling us to regularly give, and how much you are calling us above and beyond to give to the For the Future initiative. You need to pray that out with whoever's in your household. If you're single, pray it out. If you got spouse, pray it out. Whatever it is, you need to pray through it, and then you decide. You decide. You don't do it out of any sense of pressure. You don't do it out of any sense of coercion or fear or anything like that. You do it because you want to partner with God in what He is trying to do here to make this church a church that our community cannot live without. So I want to show you this card. First service, you are going to get this card as you leave. I want you to know you have to the end of this series to pray and decide. But do not miss this. This is above and beyond your regular giving. So if you are not currently regularly giving to Southridge Church, what I would like you to do is to do that first. Once you have done that, then join us in the For the Future initiative. And here's what we're asking. Those of you, you're regular givers, this is how I broke it down. This is the way that my mind works. It's way easier this way. It says, relying on God and trusting Him and His promises over the next 3 years, we plan to give blank, above and beyond our regular giving. Do you know if we have 4 families, if 4 families could say, yes, God has richly blessed us, and over the next 4 years, we're going to give $50,000 above and beyond what we normally give. It's about $16,000 a year more. Some of us, you could do that today, some of us. You get 4 of those, that's $200,000. 4 families going, yeah, we'll sacrifice at that level. $25,000 over 3 years, that's about $8,800 a year additional. But let's say we get 10 families at that $25,000. That's $250,000. That's a quarter of what we owe. It doesn't take like when people are really get on board. It doesn't take much money, does it? Because if we got the 4 at the 50 and the 10 at the 25, we're almost at $500,000 already. See how doable this thing is? You get about 10 people at that $15,000. That's $5,000 additional over 3 years. $150,000. That puts us over $500,000. You get 10 or 20 more in the 10,000. That's 100,000 to 200,000 more. There we're at 700,000. You get, let's say 10, 15, 20 families at the 5. That's another 100,000. You got people doing custom gifts. You're like, I don't know if I can do any of these big numbers, but here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do $100 every week. I'm gonna do $10 every week, or I'm gonna do a one-time gift of 100,000. Whatever it is. You're gonna get this on the way out, and I want you and your family to pray over it. Fill it out, and then at any point in this series, you can drop it in the offering bucket. I am the only person that will see these pledges. This is not going to go to anyone else. And don't worry, I'm not checking up on you either. You ain't going to get calls like, hey, you look like you're a little bit behind. No, this is between you and God. I only need to know so the way I can say, yeah, we got $1 million worth of pledges, so we should pay off our debt in 3 years. Right, so I'm not tracking it in that way. But here's what I want to do. I want to make sure that you know exactly where we're at as you do this. The debt as it sat on Thursday when I got this number, I think it is a little less now because we did send another payment. $1,057,828.38. That's where we're at. Now, your staff and elders have been praying about this for a lot longer than what you've been hearing about it. This is about a 3-year process for us. And so we were ready to go ahead and make our commitment, because here's what I want you to know, is your staff and elders are not going to ask you to do something that we are not willing to do. And so the staff and elder commitment over the next 3 years is going to be $150,300. That's from 6 families. That's 6, maybe 7 families. We're committing the first $150,000 to this campaign. Or sorry, that's 12 families. 12 families. And then last week, I had someone who's already so fired up about the campaign come up and tell me that over the next 3 years, they will be giving $100,000 to this campaign. That's from one family. So before I even come to you as the church for your commitments, I have secured $250,300 already in pledges. We are already a quarter of the way there. Thank you. We are already a quarter of the way there with 13 families. There's probably about another 100 to 150 families to get involved. I say all this because it's doable. That means that the church just needs to come up with $807,528 in pledges. You commit to it, and by faith, trusting God, He will come through. He'll come through. Just listen, He's a generous God, and you were made in His image. And it may seem like a daunting task, but it's only because you haven't been working that muscle. And the more that you work it, the more it will get in shape, and the better it will eventually feel. You're made in the image of a generous God who gave His Son for you. He is crazy about you. He loves you. No matter if you give a lot or a little, He is absolutely crazy about you.